Welcome to the People and Planet podcast, a show all about human health, planetary health, and the links between them. I'm your host, Alya Al-Hamed, an integrative nutrition health coach with a master's in environmental sustainability. I spent most of my life exploring these topics, and this podcast is my effort to collect and deliver information from experts to improve the quality of your life and that of our planet. Thank you so much for being here. In this episode, I'll be interviewing Samia Alduaji, who is an environmental expert with extensive experience working in sustainable development, natural resource management, environmental governance, and climate change. She has worked with the World Bank, the United Nations Development Programme, United Nations Environment Programme, and the European Union. She worked on several operational projects and technical assistance programs in Kuwait, Bahrain, Egypt, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, Jordan, Sudan, Djibouti, and Syria, as well as regional marine initiatives in the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and the Arabian Gulf. Her work stretches over many sectors such as oil spill contingency planning, ecosystem management, sustainable fisheries, solid waste management, pollution assessment, and sustainability reporting. She is the co-founder and managing partner of Reefs and Beyond, a boutique event and advisory company that promotes environmental awareness and sustainable lifestyle through educational programs and social events. Samia launched the Instagram account @SustainableLivingKuwait 5 years ago to raise awareness of the environmental issues facing the region and the planet. Since then, it's become a platform for environmental news and local initiatives supporting NGOs and eco-friendly businesses. I've been following Sustainable Living Kuwait for a while now and love the content they share, and it's how I connected with Samia recently. She has a big following and is really doing a wonderful job of spreading awareness for environmental issues, as well as offering tips and tools for reducing our footprint on the planet. Today we'll be talking about a range of topics from fast fashion to energy efficient homes, marine ecosystems, air pollution, and more. I hope you enjoy. Hi Samia, thank you so much for being here. It's so lovely to see you.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's lovely to see you too, and I'm looking forward to a very cool conversation.
Yeah, same. I've been following your Instagram account for quite a while now, and I love the content that you're posting, especially for our part of the world, for Kuwait, for the Middle East, for the GCC. So thank you for what you do and for the awareness and the education that you're sharing.
Thank you so much. This means a lot to us. Honestly, it's been a journey, and every little helps. Anything we can do to raise awareness, we just go for it, because I mean, what's happening around the planet is it's not a joke, basically.
Yeah, it's not a joke. We're in a bit of a crisis. You recently posted something about the coral reefs and coral reef bleaching, and that's when we connected recently and we had a conversation. I said, please, I'd love to interview you. And funnily enough, you posted that just when I came back from the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, which was a bucket list item for me. And I spent some time there and I saw coral bleaching with my own two eyes of the reef, which is I think the biggest reef on the planet. It's the size of Japan. And to see that was absolutely devastating. I was calling it like an ecocide. And I learned actually that there are 3 stages of bleaching. First, when the coral is stressed, it fluoresces, which means it turns all these beautiful fluorescent colors, but it means it's stressed. And then it bleaches, so it goes white, which means it's struggling and it's dying. And then it goes, if it doesn't survive, it goes brown and it's completely dead. And I saw that firsthand. And then I came back and I saw you posting about it. Do you think you can talk to us a little bit about coral bleaching, the implication it has on the world, on the planet, on marine ecosystems, maybe even on our food supply?
Yeah, thanks for this question. So, coral bleaching really is kind of like one of the symptoms of what's happening around the planet. Bleaching events tend to happen, every few years due to unusual weather patterns or El Nino. The famous bleaching event that everybody remembers was in 1998. I think that was the biggest bleaching event around the world. But usually corals are able to recover. However, what we've been seeing in the last, since the turn of the century, because of everything's exasperated with climate change and the increased heat and increased water temperature, bleaching events are quite abundant now around the world, and coral are not able to recover. So you mentioned the Great Barrier Reef. I mean, this is one of the tragic tales of what's happening. And unfortunately, Australia seems to be bearing the brunt, whether on land or at sea. But in terms of implications, so the ecosystem itself it's a symbiotic relationship with all the species that exist there. So you have specific type of fish that live off the coral. And then you have predatory fish that live off that fish. So then you have, if one part of that cycle is damaged or under threat, then it cascades to other parts of this food chain. One of the examples, I think you mentioned Australia, but we can maybe talk about something closer to home. So Kuwait, for example, the coral islands are Garo, Maradim, and Kubar. And one thing that we've noticed, and a lot of the scientists have noticed here, is the abundance of sea urchins, right? And the thing is with the sea urchins, so they rely the predator of the sea urchin is the parrotfish, but because of the way, like it's so the sea urchins are blooming because of the breakdown of the ecosystem. Now, what's the cause exactly? This is something that's being studied, but that just shows you a simple example of unfortunately the coral reefs in Kuwait are degrading, and you don't have the abundant marine life that you used to see 20 years ago. And as I mentioned, this is all part of a food chain, and you see the impact further up or further down the food chain.
I guess the key takeaway here is that everything is connected in an ecosystem, and we need diversity to have a robust ecosystem. And if one thing is kind of, pulled off kilter a little bit, then we can have a bloom of another species, which then suffocates the ecosystem, or there aren't enough other types of species to bring things into balance. I've seen that also in Australia, where there was, I think, a lot of red starfish that just bloomed and suffocated the ecosystem.
Yes.
And you're talking about the sea urchins in Kuwait, and I've seen that too. So this is not just an ecosystem in oceans, it's ecosystems everywhere in the world. When there's an imbalance in the food chain, in the food system, and we have that negative impact in one area, there's a ripple effect to all the other species. And I think that's important to understand, and can eventually, impact the greater whole and our food supply. And if we go fishing, or if we rely on the reef like other coastal marine communities do, so it has a ripple effect even to us.
So you have to keep in mind that most of the, if we're talking about the developing world, quite a lot of communities do rely on the sea for their food supply. So if you have this imbalance, and if you have part of the food chain under threat and causing this imbalance, you are talking about the livelihoods of millions of people. Coastal communities around sub-Saharan Africa, around Southeast Asia, and Latin America. A lot of communities rely solely on fisheries in general, whether it's for fishing activities, whether it's the tourism, etc. So the socioeconomic impact should not be underestimated. It might look like a bleached reef, but there's so many livelihoods impacted by this bleached reef. If a country, for example, you mentioned Australia. Australia is a wealthy country, but if you look at some of the Caribbean islands, Belize or Honduras and so on, the second largest barrier reef in the world is the Mesoamerican barrier reef, which goes along the Caribbean, and a lot of the communities there are either relying solely on their livelihoods, solely on the health of the coral reef, or the tourism, the ecotourism, the diving, etc., that comes with a healthy coral reef. So it does trickle down to every segment of a coastal community. So I think it's It's not an underlooked issue, but I think the gravity is not always captured.
Yeah, and I read somewhere, I learned about how these coastal communities around the world, when they have access to adequate fish or adequate amounts of omega-3, then they have a healthy pregnancy and they can carry a pregnancy to term, and they have proper brain development, because omega-3 is so important for brain development. And now that we have marine ecosystems that are under threat and fisheries under threat, you actually have all these people that are having birth defects or developmental defects for their babies. And so, yeah, I mean, as you said, there's a cascade, there's a domino effect, with marine ecosystems degrading or being under threat. Coming back to local issues, local meaning Kuwait, but also GCC, I think, but also this exists around the world, is our desalination plants. I'd love to talk to you about desalination and its impact on marine ecosystems, coastal ecosystems, but also the energy intensity that it requires to just power these desalination plants, our reliance on them, the demand for them, and what the impacts are there.
So, I mean, with desalination, so for the Gulf countries, I mean, we're in a very tricky situation, because obviously we don't have abundant water resources. We have aquifers, but they're not enough to sustain a modern society. So desalination is extremely energy intensive, and one of the impacts of desalination is the brine that results from the actual process. And the brine, unfortunately, a lot of the times is dumped straight back into the sea. And in the Gulf, there's been quite a lot of studies that look at the increased salinity from the brine that's dumped into the sea from desalination. And that's exacerbated as well by the fact that the freshwater sources coming into the Gulf are under threat as well, because so there's a lot of dam construction upstream along Syria, Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. And then you also have the decreased rainfall because of climate change. So increased salinity is already being observed slightly. We're not at sort of danger levels yet. But if we continue with our unsustainable practices and the extremely intense desalination processes, and we don't have a viable solution for the brine yet, or if there is, it's not yet economical that countries are investing in this solution. And add to that, obviously, that it's the fact that it's energy intensive. You have the carbon emissions resulting from the operation of these desalination plants. So there are now new technologies being adopted, but it's again, it's still the technology hasn't been scaled up yet, which is using renewable energy to power desalination plants. But again, we're not there yet. I mean, that just requires huge investments. Probably, I don't know, maybe there's something that your audience won't like, but maybe nuclear energy might be a solution, or hydrogen, and so on. Like this is an area that I think a lot of Gulf countries are exploring. But what we need to do is just be careful about our water consumption. I mean, this is something that that might sound controversial. Like, I mean, do we need that much agriculture in the Gulf if we're relying on desalinated water to keep a lot of these farms running? I know it's a catch-22, but do you want to import all your food? You want the food security. You don't want the food miles. But then again, and it's these decisions. This is the kind of dilemma of every policymaker, and that's why you do dull things like cost-benefit analysis, or you weigh or you look at subsidies, whatever. This is where economists come in and just study the whole issue and see if something like that is worth it. Because so if I go to a farm in Kuwait, a lot of them are relying on desalinated water. Now, okay, are these farms feeding the population? They're not. We don't have enough farmland in Kuwait to guarantee our food security. We don't produce enough protein for the population. And a lot of the farms are expensive, so the produce is on the expensive side. So they're probably appealing to more of a middle class, the middle classes in general. So this is where this balance is really, really important. So people need to think about their water consumption. I think this is another thing that we don't highlight enough. Because we don't pay especially, I don't know about the UAE, but definitely in Kuwait, it's heavily subsidized, so people don't appreciate the value of water. It's not captured in our bills, and as a result, you see this unsustainable pattern of consumption. So we need desalination, obviously, because we don't have enough water resources, but we need it to be priced properly. And we need to be conscious about our consumption, because it's not just a drain on the environment, on the marine environment, on our emissions, but it's a drain on the country's resources and budget, basically, and on the economy.
Yeah, and the important thing, I guess, here that you're trying to illustrate is that when something is subsidized, people waste a lot. And so when we talk about consumer behavior or consumption behavior, it's like, of course, we have to take a shower and wash our clothes and wash our dishes. But I've seen things where people are not just leaving the tap on when they're brushing their teeth. They're leaving the hose running while they're washing their car, but the phone rang. So they leave the hose running for 10 minutes to answer the call and come back. So it's like, of course, we need to wash our car and take a shower and do all those activities, but let's just be a little bit more mindful about our behavior, because we are in a crisis and we are in the desert after all. And you mentioned farmland. It's an interesting point as well, because when you're in the desert and you're trying to have productive landscape, we have to consider where the water comes from. But something that I did when I worked in Dubai at on a sustainability project, I was a consultant. We captured water and recycled it. So there was black water that comes from the bathroom, and then there's gray water that comes from like your sinks and your dishwasher and your laundry. And they would be treated and then recycled. So black water, obviously, since it comes from the bathroom, the treated black water would go to non-productive irrigation. So irrigating land that you can't eat. So like trees or palm trees or whatever. And then the gray water would go to irrigate productive landscapes, so food that you could eat. But it's like, it's treated and it would just go to like the farms. So again, it's the lesser of two evils. We're still using a lot of water for our landscape, but it's just capturing and lowering the demand of the desalination plants. And something, just in case people don't know, brine is salty water. So what Samia was saying is that when we desalinate from the Gulf, we have then salt left over. And what happens is the salt goes back into the Gulf, which raises salinity levels in the Gulf, which can eventually, maybe not yet, we're not under threat yet, but eventually can lead to an ecosystem threat, ecosystem decline, because those organisms, those fish, those coral reefs can't survive. They'll be choking with all the salinity. So there is a future threat there.
Yeah. I mean, it's exacerbated by climate change as well. I mean, that's the problem with the increased salinity.
We talk about carbon emissions and desalination plants being energy intensive. And of course, our part of the world, but also many other areas in the world, rely on fossil fuels. Can we talk a little bit about pollution, air quality, and the impact it has on us, maybe regionally, globally?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in my opinion, I think air pollution is one of the main public health issues facing environmental public health issues, let's say, that facing our region. There is when you look at air pollution, you're measuring particulate matter, which is PM10, PM2.5, and this is the size of these like tiny little particles in the atmosphere, in the air. And then you have the emissions from cars or industry, which is SO2, NO2, and VOCs, etc. And this is what you look at. This is what is measured daily by any environmental authority, and it's measured daily in all the Gulf. And PM2.5 is the most it's the most dangerous. PM 2.5 is what causes a lot of the respiratory diseases, and now they're even linking it to cardiovascular diseases and so on. And PM 2.5, us being in a desert environment, there is natural dust. And what we did an assessment 10 years ago when I worked at the World Bank for Kuwait, and this probably applies to the neighboring countries as well because the economies are very similar. So what we found is, if you look at something called the source apportionment study, and you look at the sources of the PM 2.5, where is it coming from? So 50% is dust. So that's something that we can't really control except with nature-based solutions, interventions like greening and so on, and etc. And these are long-term solutions. But then the rest of the kind of sources, majority came from refineries, followed by power plants, which is the desalination and the power generation, and then the third source, which is not insignificant, is from transport. So the cars we drive. I keep having these discussions about the merits of electric vehicles versus, for climate, etc. And then, why do we use electric if the source is from fuel, if the electricity is generated anyway from fuel? To me, it's not about CO2 alone. It's about the air you breathe every day. Because CO2 doesn't damage your health. CO2 damages the environment, damages the planet. But the other gases damage your health. And so we look at the data, let's say, I know about Kuwait mostly. If you look at the PM 2.5 data and the other factors, during rush hour, it shoots up and then it calms down and then it shoots up again. And this is measured in residential areas. We're not talking about the areas near the refineries or so on. This is in Kuwait City. And it's because of the cars we drive. And I think people tend to hear, it's not just here, it's around the world. SUVs most people don't need SUVs. They're not out in the desert hunting and chasing sand dunes or anything, it's just and fuel efficiency is not we don't have the regulations that the US and Europe have on air quality or fuel efficiency or whatever for our cars to be burning less than American or European cars. The changes in America were all entirely driven by the state of California, and Europe it's the EU. So a petrol car in Europe lasts you a lot longer than a petrol car in Kuwait. So transport is a big one. And these are the choices we make. I made the conscious decision when I bought a new car to buy a smaller car because I don't need a big gas guzzler. And then in terms of energy, if we're talking the power plants and so on, so we in the Gulf have the highest per capita emissions, CO2 emissions. So that fuel that's being burnt also generates other pollutants. And the reason we have high CO2 per capita emissions is because of air conditioning. And this is again, it's like desalination. We need it. We live in very hot countries. However, how many times have you been to a mall or an office in June or July and it's absolutely freezing cold? I went to a meeting in the middle of July. Temperature is 50 degrees outside in Kuwait, and everybody in the office was wearing a jacket. It doesn't make sense. There's been calculations, there's been studies done. If you just increase the temperature in an office from, let's say, if it's set at 20 and you just or 21 and you just increase it by 2 degrees, you will see a drop in emissions. You'll see a drop in consumption. And this is a study that was done in LSE by one of my relatives who did it as part of his master's degree. And I know also, urban planners, whatever, have done similar studies. And we're talking about probably like a 30% decrease in CO2 emissions per capita if we just increase the air conditioning temperature by 2 degrees. So this is where, I think this is where people need to be conscious, Again, and you talk about things like electricity, the houses are big. I mean, especially the older houses are not very efficient. So you got to look at both. You got to look at the energy consumption and improving energy efficiency in a lot of the houses. I don't know if you know, in Europe, there's this big push to insulate a lot of the houses, like in the UK and whatever. And it's an actual, activists are campaigning for this. Because if you just insulate UK homes, you will see a tremendous drop in CO2 emissions. And it's the same with the Gulf. If we just increase the temperature a little bit, build properly, build them to new standards, build them to green standards, have proper insulation, you will see the energy consumption reduce. And if we drive smaller cars or electric vehicles or hybrids and so on, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think having an efficient home, as you say, is so important. I think we insulated our home in Kuwait. And for people who don't know what that really means, is that when you turn your AC on, or when it's freezing like in the UK and you turn your heat on, the temperature doesn't leave your house. So if you're turning the AC on, it doesn't require as much energy to cool the home, because the cool air stays in the home. It doesn't leak out. So that's why insulating the home is so much more efficient, because you don't need as much AC to come in to change the temperature. Also, there are energy efficient appliances. And this is something I also looked into when I was in the UAE, in terms of dishwashers, refrigerators, I think kettles. Kettles apparently require a lot of energy, weirdly enough. It's like you don't really think about a kettle. Certain things that are always on, like the TV with the light that's always on, if you can just switch it off. So appliances are like drawing out energy, even if they're not being used. A laptop that's on instead of switched off, things like this. And we don't think about it, but our homes are constantly and consistently using up energy. Now, for like a fridge or a freezer, you do want them on and working properly all the time, obviously, because it's food, but there are energy efficient certifications for those appliances, and you can buy them at a grade A or double A.
Yes.
And have a freezer or a fridge that works perfectly, but just doesn't leak out, energy usage. So I think that's an important piece. Do you think all this impacts our microclimate, like locally and regionally? And do you think this is connected to the prevalence of dust storms in our area?
Yeah. So I think there's been quite a few studies looking at the sort of increased dust storms in our region, and right now there's a joint project between UN Habitat, funded by Kuwait, and the Iraqi government, based on the analysis, which is the droughts in Iraq and Syria are causing the increased dust storms in Kuwait in particular. Most of the dust that comes, there's localized dust, but there's regional dust, and that's another thing that I actually forgot to mention as well with the PM 2.5. So yeah, not all of it is local. A lot of it is regional, and what they found is that so a lot of it, like I said, comes from Iraq and Syria, and is directly as a result of the increased drought. Now, Iraq, obviously, in the 90s, Saddam Hussein drained the marshes, and that caused quite a lot of sort of increased desertification in the area. They've rehabilitated about 60%, but there's still like damaged ecosystems there. But what the Kuwait Fund and UN Habitat are doing with the Iraqi government is just planting. I mean, there's just something as simple as planting palm trees. And they're they're native to the region. This is something that the Iraqis have been doing for thousands of years. And it's just because of the climate and unfortunately the wars and so on, the ecosystem is degraded. So yeah, I mean, that is actually a solution to an ongoing problem. But yeah, definitely the droughts in Iraq and Syria are one of the main reasons why we get a lot of dust in Kuwait.
So planting indigenous trees are really important because it sequesters carbon, first and foremost, which means it captures carbon from the air and puts it into the soil. It regenerates the soil. And then when you use indigenous plants, it doesn't require as much water as if it wasn't indigenous to the area. Its need and its demand for water is within context of like the region. So you don't need to plant it like you would as if it belonged in the UK. So just I reiterate, so in case, my audience doesn't understand some of the things we talk about, I like to reiterate just a little bit. Why is there a drought in Iraq and in Syria? And then how is their drought affecting our dust storms?
The drought in Iraq and Syria. I mean, the droughts in general in the MENA region are a result of climate change, but in Iraq and Syria they're exacerbated by the instability, and the fact that you have this issue where there's like a power vacuum, and neighboring countries have taken advantage by constructing dams that are really impacting the water flow of both of the Tigris and Euphrates River. So you have socioeconomics, you have water governance issues, because there's no, unfortunately, there's a lot of civil strife. Syria is not even. Technically it's stable. It's calmer now, but I wouldn't say the civil war is over. And Iraq has had its problems as well. So when you have, you can't isolate some of the natural phenomena or some of the climate impacts from the bad governance, because you need a resilient economy and a resilient country with resources to combat some of these issues. But if your river is already polluted, if you don't have proper water management policies, if you don't have, like I said, maybe the irrigation is unsustainable or whatever, or your farmland is not protected, and so on, all of these things just exacerbate an already existing problem. So Syria and Iraq have experienced decreased rainfall over the past 20 years. In fact, the Dar'a, which is where the first spark of the civil war started, experienced drought before the war. For a good 5-6 years. So when you have, this is where proper governance is important, because when you have really harsh natural conditions or natural disasters and so on, you need a proper system in place. This is why when you look at climate change impacts and vulnerability, you will always see that whatever the impacts in Europe, even though they've been flooded and they've had wildfires, or we've had again in Kuwait, in the vulnerability index, we're not considered very vulnerable because wealthy countries with proper infrastructure, despite some of the perceived inefficiencies in the system, it's still operating. Whereas countries that have sort of serious socioeconomic issues, they are considered more vulnerable to the sort of natural disasters and climate change in general. So I hope that explains it properly. But I would blame, so just to summarize, I would blame a bit of climate change, a bit of politics and bad governance, and also the power vacuum where Turkey is allowed to kind of build as many dams as it wants without any pushback. Iraq doesn't have a strong negotiating position, neither does Syria, to push back against some of the incredible dam construction going on in Turkey.
Speaking about governance, I wanted to talk to you about plastics and microplastics. And that's something I wish we had better governance on. Maybe, having some legislation on not having as many plastic bags available in supermarkets, really getting that into the law, or the way that we get rid of or throw away plastics, or how we deal with them in landfill, even recycling. You see Switzerland and it's illegal not to recycle, and that is part of the law. I know recycling is kind of the lesser of two evils. It just pushes the can further down the road, in the sense that, for people who don't know, when you have a plastic bottle, you can only recycle it up to 5 times, and then it eventually ends up in landfill. So recycling is not the best solution. It's a kind of mitigation tactic, but it's not the best solution. But still, like microplastics are showing up in our oceans, in our food supply, in our placenta, in our fish. And what do you think we should do, or what's the situation, I guess, regionally or in Kuwait, or what are ways that we can mitigate this huge problem, global problem, but also just health problem?
So with single-use plastic in general, this is a global problem, as you mentioned. And the United Nations, through the United Nations Environment Programme, is working on a global treaty to phase out single-use plastic. And you know, like you mentioned, with the plastic bottles, etc. So, for example, Kuwait, and I think it's the same in the Gulf as well. The tap water is suitable for drinking, so we don't actually need to be consuming that much water in plastic bottles, because it's a matter of just having the right filtration at home. If you don't trust if you think the tank. The tank that you have is old, or you need to change it, or whatever, or just add a filter at home. And you know, this is something that we've adopted at home. Plastic bags, cutlery, and so on. It is regulation. I mean, it needs to be phased out, as it has been, and it's you know, the process has been rolled out. The regulations have been rolled out in the EU and in the US. And it's not just, you know, we don't have to look at the West the whole time. Philippines have banned single-use plastic bags. A lot of sub-Saharan Africa, you know, even I'm trying to think of the Arab countries: Tunisia, Morocco, Oman. The UAE will start next year. I think Abu Dhabi will start with banning single-use plastic, all single-use plastic, if I'm not mistaken. Some of it is more challenging than you know, some items are more challenging than others. But there are many instruments that you can adopt. You can either introduce regulation, or you can introduce incentives, or you can, you know, charge people. Whatever works in the context of the country. For our countries, it's usually better to have regulation and bans, you know, because, so we looked at the possibility of charging people for plastic bags in Kuwait. And it's just the way the government is structured. It'll be difficult to collect the fees and ensure, you know, that it's that the funds are allocated properly, etc. So for a country like Kuwait, whatever, an outright ban would be suitable, and then you provide alternatives. Also, I would say invest in R&D, and there are so many innovations now around the world. People are using all sorts of creative ideas to make toothbrushes or you know, bags, etc. These can be used as an alternative, because even so, you think a tote is better than a plastic bag, but producing these cotton totes consumes a lot of water. I mean, and the emissions from these cotton totes are not small. So the trick here is to actually reduce. You know, as they say in the world of waste management, you know, you reduce, reuse, and then recycle. But with plastics in general, I think whatever the international community agrees on, and it should become a legally binding treaty by next year, I think should be adopted in all our countries in a reasonable way. And it's also awareness. I mean, you know, like I said, the alternatives are out there. You know, a lot of companies are trying to reduce their plastic use by offering the, you know, bamboo alternatives, etc. And then the plastic issue is an awareness issue more than anything, because as you know, a lot of plastic is not even recyclable. So it's a matter of just phasing out single-use plastic and raising awareness about the impacts.
I mean, there are some things that I see that really don't need plastic. In some cases, I know that it's difficult to replace, let's say in a hospital or a medical environment. Like maybe we don't have, like you say, let's invest in R&D and research and development to find a syringe not made from plastic. But that's like not, those are not priorities right now because that's important. We need these materials in a hospital medical setting. Eventually, it'd be nice to not have plastic anywhere. But when I see my avocado with a skin that is already protecting it from the outside world,
Yeah.
covered in plastic silicone. Why? Or an orange that has been peeled and then put in a plastic cup. Why? These things don't need to happen. Or when I go to a supermarket and they give me a plastic bag for my toothpaste and then one for my banana, why can't I just have one bag for both of those things? So it's just the overconsumption of unnecessary plastic. I think that stuff should just, it's such an easy, like low-hanging fruit. That should be, first with awareness, should just be eradicated. And second, I think through legislation, like we should not be wrapping our avocados or our pineapples or our bananas in plastic. They already have a really good natural case and that's it. Like it doesn't need more than that. Certain packaging, I've seen really good and really successful packaging just done with cardboard and like these potato starch silicone, they call them peanuts that come inside to just keep the package like bubble wrapped, There's potato starch plastic bags as well that if you put in water, it just disintegrates. So there, as you say, there are innovative alternatives out there and this should be a no-brainer. Then slowly we make it to places that it's a little bit higher stakes, like a hospital or medical environment. But like these low stakes, low hanging fruit, grocery examples of single-use plastic is just unnecessary and kind of like crazy. Speaking of consumption, I'd love to talk to you about conspicuous consumption, which is basically consuming for status, consuming luxury goods just to show. Can we talk a little bit about that and consumer behavior around that and maybe share some of your thoughts around it?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, it's it's the fast fashion. Like this is something that I honestly, I don't know how to resolve this issue. So there's a concept in environmental regulation called the polluter pays principle, where if you as a company, you're the one who's generating all this pollution, you need to pay a penalty, and it's priced according to the level of pollution, market instruments, and so on. And I really think the fashion companies need to start, sort of bearing the brunt of the pollution that they're causing. Because, first of all, a 2KD or a $2 T-shirt doesn't make sense. Some things, someone somewhere is suffering. Number one, okay. Either it's a community that's been polluted, or a woman that's been working overtime, or a child, or we don't know. But fast fashion is something, and the thing is with fast fashion, because the pushback you get is that not everybody can afford to buy, like the Pradas or whatever. And we'll talk about conspicuous consumption later. But and with fast fashion, the drivers behind fast fashion are not poor, not the low income families. It's middle classes. It's teenagers. It's social media. It's fads. It's wanting to wear the latest. It's going into Zara every 2 weeks and buying useless things that will not last. And this is something that we always try to promote: buy less and buy better. So that's the fast fashion issue is, I don't know, because as soon as you see the fashion sector, fashion industry trying tiny steps to clean their act, and then a company like Shein comes in and just shatters the entire market, and just with they have, I think, outpriced and out fast fashioned their competitors. So that's one side. And then on the other side, the luxury and the conspicuous consumption. So I would say at least a Prada bag. If you're buying one, if you're buying 5, then that's another issue. But the Prada bag should last a little longer. It probably involves some skilled community in Italy somewhere putting it together. I don't know, or maybe like a Bottega bag or something. So luxury fashion, I don't mind so much if it's done if you're buying like a normal person, which means that you know you're buying a luxury item and you know that this is a valuable item and that this is something that you have for a very, very long time. And you're not obsessed with every 6 months buying the latest of this and the latest of that. And the fashion industry during COVID kind of had a rethink and a reevaluation, and they were wondering whether do we need 4 seasons a year? Do we need the cruise collection? Do we need that? And I think there were positive changes, but then, you know, everybody's gone back to normal. Everybody's gone back to the normal habits. You see now with a lot of brands, you know, they're trying to use recycled material here or there or so on, or source sustainably. And, you know, I respect that, but it's a matter of, do we need that much? I mean, you know, like we grew up at a time, I mean, I still have my mother's beautiful evening wear that we can still wear, you know, because it was beautiful, classic, and just, you know, luckily, you know, it fits us. And I remember that these clothes used to last and people appreciated, you know, buying seasonally. So I am not a fan of, I've never been a big fan of labels, and, you know, I don't like the herd mentality. But again, you know, if you have money, buy one bag and keep it for years rather than just throwing money around. You know what I mean?
Yeah, this is the thing. Like, I'm not at all having the intention to shame anybody with their purchasing behavior. I mean, I have some luxury items myself. I have purchased, I continue to purchase. It's just the rate in which we purchase. It's the mindset. I think with social media, there is a bit of this like comparison. There's a bit of a FOMO. There's a bit of like trying to keep up with the latest trends. It's a lot faster, the world that we live in, compared to our mothers and our grandmothers or grandfathers or whatever. So it's just faster, whether it's luxury goods or it's fashion, fast fashion. Also, there's a beautiful movement that, yes, there's conscious fashion labels and conscious brands that are using recycled material and upcycled material, but also, and if you go the luxury route, as you say, like I try to stay away from fast fashion as much as possible just because of how horrendous it is for deforestation and the environment, and even socioeconomic reasons. But it's just, it doesn't last as long, so it ends up in landfill quite quickly. But there's this beautiful movement of reusing and upcycling and having vintage luxury brands. So if you are someone that buys nice shirts, a nice luxury bag or whatever, you can go and buy it like as that secondhand. And I think it's called the Real in America. You've got really good ones here in the UK. So there are options to buy your items. But the question here is the mindset of my internal dialogue of how I feel about myself when I buy, the status, the mindset around status, the mindset around the trends and how much. I guess the question is always understanding the why behind our shopping and consumption behavior. It's the why. It's okay to want to look, you know, lovely for a wedding or lovely for our day-to-day lives or whatever and have something nice. I don't want to shame anybody for that at all. But it's like, how frequently do I need to consume and take from the world? Because essentially every time we buy something, we are taking from the world. So I guess it's just opening the discussion around that, because I know our part of the world, consumption is at an all-time high. You know, we've got some of the biggest malls in the world in our region. A lot of luxury brands, again, like without having that kind of vintage appeal, which I think is starting to come. You do have some shops in Dubai where you can rent a dress for a wedding, like a beautiful gown, so you don't have to go buy a new one and give it back. And I think these are becoming trendy now, which is a good thing.
Yeah, you know, so that there was an attempt to start this business in Kuwait, so renting luxury items and, you know, evening wear and so on, and so the business owner assumed that most of her clientele would be young women who still can't, they're not earning enough to actually purchase really expensive dresses and so on. And it turned out that most of her clientele were like moms who just could not justify for themselves to spend this much amount for a wedding or something, and that they probably for a dress that they will wear once or twice again, because they are a bit more realistic about expenses and fees, and they have schools and school fees and a budget to think about and a household to maintain and whatever. So yeah, you never know. I mean, it's just sometimes like reality hits you. But I agree with you that something happened in the Gulf. Something happened to our societies in the last 30, 40 years where we it's almost like our status symbol is what we wear and what labels and what handbags we carry, and it's gotten to a point where even people who can't afford these items are going into debt just to look the right way. And I wonder if this is this is so detrimental to a society, because this is not a healthy way to exist. I just sometimes find it quite troubling, when I mean, I don't mean to judge, but I know what someone's salary is. Why are they decked out and decked out in designer gear? I mean, surely like something somewhere is bank account, credit card debt. Something is not right. Something is missing in the big picture. So this is what I mean. It's just I find, unfortunately, Gulf societies, I think we need to change our mindset regarding luxury and shopping and brands
and not just Gulf societies, but I think it's prevalent in our region. But I think if you said mental health, and I think I would be interested to see what would happen if we don't have access to social media or TV, but let's say social media because it's a bit faster and a lot more like in your face, and how that would change how we feel about ourselves, how we feel when we feel like we need to keep up with the Jonases or follow trends or whatever. I have to be honest, like I fall victim to some of these trends because I'm like, wow, that skincare looks so good, or that, sweater looks amazing. And I'm just like, I get drawn in because of the way that social media like hits your dopamine receptors, how you just see very fast trends moving and you see it like unfolding in front of your eyes and you just think it's really cool. But if we didn't have that, I don't know if we would have such a high level of conspicuous consumption. But to tie it back to like the environment, because I love that we talk about like mental health and like our internal environment, like how we think and our mindset around this, because it is important. Human behavior is really, it's a whole psychological field and story to unpack, and maybe not for right now, maybe another day, as to why we buy what we buy and how it makes us feel. But to come back to the environment, I know that your friend and I think business partner was in fashion, and you were talking to me about like textile waste and how the fashion industry and how we create these materials and these colors are so damaging to the environment and how much water is needed. So again, there's nothing wrong with wanting to look nice, look beautiful, look presentable, whatever, whether you're going to a gala or just staying at your house, but understanding where some of these materials come from, always opting for something upcycled whenever you can or organic, because when you see those photos of textile waste and how much that is threatening our natural environment, our natural world, how much lead and heavy metals and paint and like colored dyes are going into our rivers and our oceans, we can start to understand that this consumer behavior driven by maybe a mindset or mental health or social media, driver is actually, this is the consequence, and I think that piece is really important. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about textile waste? I know you have some experience, or at least your business partner was in it, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, if you just have to Google, textile waste in Chile or in Ghana, and you see mountains and mountains and mountains of old clothes, and this is all fast fashion. And the problem with fast fashion is that even if you're in London or somewhere in the US, and you think you're donating to Oxfam or the charity, or you're donating to a charity here in the Gulf and so on, most of this, the quality is so poor that even when these items are shipped to Ghana, or Kenya or whatever, thinking that, okay, we're providing clothing to kind of impoverished populations. Even somebody who is in a dire economic situation has some pride. And you see, there's quite a few documentaries and news reports about people from, captured in a Ghanaian market complaining. They're like, what do people think we are? If this T-shirt is falling apart in my hands, and they expect me to wear this. Of course, we're not going to accept this. So that's the problem with fast fashion. Disposing of fast fashion is not easy. At the end of the day, a luxury item you can upcycle, you can do something with it. There's a fantastic designer that I recommend you interview. Maybe you can maybe edit this out. Rani Helu, he's Lebanese. He's based in Qatar. I've interviewed him. We worked with him previously, and he uses luxury materials to make his clothes. And he's fantastic. He won awards and so on. So at least with a luxury item, you can actually put it back in the circular economy. Fast fashion, you can't. It's just, it's bad. It's really poor quality, and it ends up in these mountains and landfills in Chile and so on. And obviously it pollutes the soil, it pollutes everything. And this is where people live. I mean, you have to respect and the dignity of these communities, and they don't want to live. Nobody wants to live next to a pile of old clothes because, the trend is this item that someone got from Primark or whatever is out of fashion, and they just chuck it away. Or again, they think they're donating. I mean, here you think you're donating. Half of it ends up in the Friday market being sold for nothing, and the rest goes to landfill. And Kuwaiti landfills, we're not even, we're at least we're not exporting the textile waste, but the Western countries are exporting their textile waste to the developing world, and again, I mean, how can there was a scandal a few years ago of Primark came out with a bikini that was £1. How can a bikini cost £1? That's insane, And Boohoo, which is another big online retailer, so they were exposed everything is made in the UK, and it's really, really cheap. So an undercover investigation exposed them for using slave labor in the UK. This was a scandal, I think, from last year or the year before. So, I mean, and this is the real cost of that £1 bikini. This is what I think people need to understand. And, unless you are on $100 a month and you have to feed a family, there's no excuse to buy a £1 bikini. It's as simple as that.
And this is something I talk about around food, again, if you can't afford it, it's another story. Although I would argue that you might have to pay the bill later for your doctors. Buying cheap food makes you sick, and then you'll have to find the money to pay for your doctors later. I say, if you think wellness is expensive, try illness. But anyway, when it comes to like really cheap food, always question. A burger is not supposed to cost $1. Like, it takes money, it takes resources to have a healthy cow, for it to eat grass, for it to have a roof over its head, for it not to be sick and full of antibiotics and hormones. Like, it should cost money to treat an animal well, not just for the, humanity and the well-being of the animal and the welfare of the animal, but also because a healthy animal is healthy food for you. So it should cost. And same thing with food. With fashion. If something is really cheap, it should send again a red flag, a bell. I'd love to close on climate action. I loved our conversation. I know there's a lot more we can talk about, but when it comes to climate action, and I know I'm someone that is far from perfect. I always think about these topics. I do have a master's in sustainability. I worked in the field. It's something I'm very passionate about, but I'm still doing my work to consume less, think differently, try not to travel as much, which is hard for me, things like that. But when we talk about climate action, is it action that government should take, so top down? Is it action that we as individuals should take, so bottom up? Let's talk a little bit about climate action, and we'll close on that subject.
So if we want to be realistic about how we would have the sort of most impact, it's top down. The governments need to address. I mean, this is where the source of most of CO2. It's heavy industry, it's fossil fuels, etc. But what we can do as individuals, as people, especially if you live in a country like Kuwait or where there's freedom of press, there's freedom of press, we can vote, etc. It's very, I really, to me, climate action here is political action. We can vote. This is Parliament will talk about it if we push them to talk about it. Societies and people and populations, etc. in Europe and South America, etc. It's all the activism in Europe and South America and India has been by the people. There are behavioral changes we could do, and you can always talk to your community and talk to your friends and try to encourage them to change their behavior. But really, I mean, what gets the headlines is somebody like Greta Thunberg, and then there's Vanessa Nakate, who is like the sort of the youth climate champion of Africa, really. And then you have, the youth in India and Asia, Southeast Asia, etc. So mobilizing, activism, engaging. I think this is how you put pressure on your government and business. So I mean, business is under pressure, and there's no doubt about it. Regulations are coming left, right, and center, and these regulations are coming from politicians and bureaucrats, etc., in the EU, responding to popular pressure. So, you have three elements here: government, private sector business, and popular pressure. The three need to complement each other. One pushes one pushes. You know what I mean? So you have, we're oil producing countries. Obviously, our situation is a little different. However, the global pressure on us to transition and to have a better energy mix is increasing every year, and there's nothing we can't avoid it. The Gulf kind of sabotaged a lot of the climate negotiations in the past. Now, this year in Dubai, the text agreed on a transition away from fossil fuels. This is like a miracle. So it's and like, let's say for Kuwait, for example, Kuwait needs to create jobs, and if we're going to continue relying on oil, we're not going to have the green jobs of the future. So this is another pressure point on the government. Why aren't we? We need technical jobs. We have a lot of engineers that need jobs. So why aren't we growing a renewable energy sector? This is a good sector that will hire all these talented young scientists. So trust me, I do believe in individual behavior. I'm like you. I'm not perfect, but I try to do the best I can. But I really think having a voice, activism, talking about it, like this podcast, raising awareness, where you can put pressure on, the government, on decision makers, and so on. You got to do it. You got to do it. Again, climate is not. It's even countries maybe with less freedoms than Kuwait. Climate is not a sensitive political issue. It can be, kind of, but it's not really. We're not talking about like geopolitics or anything like that. Saudi Arabia is already the GCC. They already see the writing on the wall in terms of economic diversification. So if you go and raise awareness, we're in danger, Jeddah needs to adapt to climate change, Dubai, what happened in Dubai with the floods. That I think, I don't want to get anybody into trouble though, just before, but but I think where you can use your voice, please do. That's my message.
Yeah, and I agree, because we can vote, and we can vote with our dollar, with everything we purchase. When you are purchasing a beautiful leather jacket that's been upcycled, or a puffer, which I actually purchased last year and I love and I will be using all winters, versus a puffer that's brand new and not upcycled. When you purchase organic produce versus inorganic, when you purchase a reusable tote or one of those bags at a supermarket versus plastic, you're voting with your dollar, you're putting demand. You can vote also, with your government. And the little kind of changes that you make in your day-to-day life matter. But I agree with you that your behavior is so much more amplified when it's top down, when it comes from the government. When you're in Europe or in Switzerland, for example, when it's illegal not to recycle, you're going to recycle because you're going to get charged. When the infrastructure is set up in a way for you to succeed, for you to recycle, for you to not have plastics in a supermarket, they completely, have different packaging. It's just done differently. Your behavior is different. It amplifies a more conscious behavior, more eco-conscious behavior. Also, the public transport. I'll be honest with you. I have my own car here. I don't really use public transport a lot, but when I'm in Switzerland and it's pristine and good quality and safe, I'm using public transport. It's just a different environment. So my behavior changes. I don't need a car. In a lot of these European cities, especially Switzerland, like, things are just done differently. It's top down. So you amplify, consumer behavior, citizen behavior when it comes from the government, when things are in legislation and policy and made illegal or legal. So I totally agree. But yes, we can raise our voices, raise awareness, and demand. We demand differently when we speak about it, when we vote differently, when we purchase differently. We have purchasing power. And I think all those things have an accumulative effect. So yes, I totally agree with you. Samia, thank you for being here. It was lovely having this conversation with you. I really appreciate all the knowledge you shared with us today. And please tell everybody where they can find you. I will link everything below. But yeah, where can people find you if they want to talk to you or engage with you?
So you can find us on at Sustainable Living KW. This is our Instagram account. Thanks to Alya, she gave us a nice plug, and so you can the account is basically it's become more of a sort of awareness raising kind of news, an environmental news outlet, and you can reach us there, as well as on LinkedIn. I'm also on LinkedIn under Samia Alduaji.
Amazing. Thank you. It was great speaking with you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I really enjoyed this conversation. And hopefully many more to come.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please share with family and friends that you feel could benefit from this episode, and make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a rating and review to support the show. Check out the links below for more information about my guests and where to find them. And make sure you're following me on Instagram at wholesome_practice to learn more about what I do. I appreciate you being here, and I'll see you on the next one. This podcast is for educational purposes only and should never replace the advice of your doctor or physician. Always consult a medical professional before making any changes or adding anything new to your diet, lifestyle, or medication protocol.